I am really glad to see everybody here tonight. I knew when I was preparing this that God knew who was going to be here tonight. And I think that very possibly tonight's topic is one of the most important topics that I'll ever have the privilege of speaking on, because I think it affects a lot of people, and I believe that it affects a lot of people's relationship with God, and I think that it affects a lot of people who are not believers yet, and it keeps them in confusion and keeps them from becoming believers. So I think this is going to be a huge topic tonight, or one of the most meaningful topics of the ones that I get to teach on. So let me start with going over or just recapping the last 4 weeks. Because the last 4 weeks we've been talking about this tension that happens with both believers and unbelievers, where we struggle with why God allows certain things to happen. A lot of people who are unbelievers use this as an excuse to not believe in God, because they say things such as, if God's an all-powerful God, then why didn't He stop the evil? Or if God's a loving God, then God will never send anybody to hell. Or what kind of a God would allow kids to have cancer? Things like that. And so they use this as a defense mechanism almost, to keep them from feeling like they need to believe in a God. Because if they can talk themselves out of believing that God is real, then they talk themselves out of believing that they need to be responsible to Him. So this ends up being a huge topic. So we've been going over this for a few weeks. The recap is, go to the next screen, David. The first week we talked about God's timing. We talked about sometimes when things don't happen the way that we think that they should, it's because God has something else in mind, and there's something having to do with timing. We want what we want, and we want it now. God has other plans. He knows what's best long term, and so sometimes He doesn't allow us to have what we think we want right now. Then the week after that, we talked about the reasons for delay, and we talked about the fact that when Lazarus had died, or actually prior to Lazarus dying, they sent somebody to get Jesus, and Jesus, come quick, Lazarus is really, really bad off, and we need you here just as soon as possible. This is your best friend Lazarus. Please hurry up. And Jesus hung out for 4 more days to make sure that Lazarus died and was already in the tomb. But there was a reason for that. They still got their prayers answered. Lazarus was still raised from the dead. But Jesus was validated that day. There was a lot of people who were still on the fence as to whether or not this was the Son of God. After all the miracles that He had done, they still wondered whether or not this was the Son of God. But only the Son of God could raise somebody from the dead. So Jesus, they got the answer that they wanted. But again, it's a timing issue. The delay was there for a reason, so that Jesus could get the glory. After that, we talk about the privilege of choice. The next week after that, we talk about the privilege of choice. We talk about the fact that why it's so important that God gives us the privilege of choice. We refer to it some as free will, but that gets into a debate about Calvinism versus Arminianism, and that's really not what we're going for. When we talk about free will, what we're talking about is you have the ability to choose. You don't have to choose God. However, since you don't have to choose God, if you do choose God, it means something to Him. We talked about robots. God has a bunch of angels, and they were created to give Him praise and glory, and that's what they do all the time. And how that pales in comparison to one person who has a free will, who doesn't have to choose God, who chooses God because they want to, how that rings praises in heaven that the angels cannot give God. And then last week we talked about the fact that sometimes the things that we go through are for God's glory. We talked about the children of Israel coming through the Wadi Watir and coming out on the beach at Nueva and being trapped. And they were panicking. And they were saying, why did you bring us out here in the desert to die? Why were there not enough graves in Egypt that you had to bring us out here to die? And they were just panicking. Because the Egyptian army was coming through the Watir, and their backs were to the Red Sea or the Yam Suf, and yet it was because God said to Moses, this is where I want you to go. Go down here, turn back, go to the watchtower, hang a right, go through here, and then I'm going to put you on the beach, and you will be trapped. He said it. He told Moses, that's what you're going to do. I'm going to do. You will be trapped. There's absolutely nothing that you can do. And I'm going to tell you this. I'm going to send the Egyptian army after you. Because he said, today, I will receive glory through this. And all of Pharaoh, and all of, actually what he's saying is all of the world, because Egypt was the preeminent world power at that time. And what he's saying is the world will know that I am God, because I'm getting ready to do this. But here's what it's going to require. It's going to be required that you be trapped, that you be in a situation that you can't do anything about. And then I will deliver you in a miraculous way. And that's what he did. And he parted the Red Sea, and we talked about that. We talked about how deep it was. If you didn't see that, that's an interesting one to watch. We've got archaeological evidence to back that up. The walls of water would have been in excess of 200 feet deep. Huge walls of water that they went through, and then every single Egyptian died, and God got the glory. The world knew that day. The world knew that day who God was. So there's times that things happen and we feel trapped and we feel like things are out of our control. And they are. Because God's got you in a position where when you get to the point that you realize you can't do it, God says, I will. But then this is what struck me, and this is what God revealed to me as I was actually studying for last week, and He told me that this is what I had to teach for this week, because I had something else planned for this week. And God said, this is what I want you to teach. That's part of the reason I feel like this is going to be so important, because, I always pray that God would show me what it is He wants me to teach. But He pulled this one out of the text for me, and I knew it was going to be a long week. I knew it was going to be a lot of studying, because He said this is what He wanted you to know. So we're going to start. You already know the story about the Red Sea, the parting of the Red Sea. You already know the story where they were at the beach and they were panicking and that kind of thing, and they were afraid they were going to die and so forth. And they get through the Red Sea, and the Red Sea closes in and kills literally every Egyptian soldier. The Bible even goes so far to say not one of them survived. Of course, then we found out that also gave us some clues, archaeologically that gave us some clues as to King Tut and why he was in the pyramid and why there's no cause of death and that kind of thing. So we got into that. You can go back and watch that on the internet if you want to. So what I want to do then is take you to just after they've crossed through the Red Sea and go to Exodus chapter 14, verse 31. It's on your screen. And when the Israelites saw the mighty hand of the Lord displayed against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord and put their trust in Him and in Moses, His servant. So that's kind of a duh. Yeah, you think? God just parted the Yam Suf. You just walked through on what was an underground or an underwater land bridge that nobody knew was there. That's over a mile wide. And even with that, God still had to part the waters that were 200 feet deep. And now you believe in God. Yay, good for you. Right? That's kind of a duh moment. That would be what I would call a life-defining moment. And they sang and they wrote songs about it, and they danced on the other side, and they looted the bodies of the soldiers that washed up on shore, which was not a lot, probably, because when the water came rushing in and it killed all of them, it drowned all of them, it said it swept them into the deep. And you'll remember that when it says into the deep, it was 3,000 feet deep on one side of that land bridge. It was 6,000 feet deep on the other side, so a mile deep on the other side. Not a good day to be wearing armor. Okay? But some of the bodies did wash up on shore and that kind of thing, and so they looted the bodies. They're singing songs, and they're having this big party about God delivering them. Okay? So after the party, after the singing, after the dance, and after the woo, look what God has done, and they're all happy and they're all excited. Of course they're excited. They got what they wanted. And you'll find out if you listen to my teaching very long that that's a pet peeve of mine. Of course they were happy. They got what they wanted. Is that the only time that we love God, is when we get what we want? Don't answer that. I know the answer to it anyhow. But I don't want that to be a part of my life. I don't want to just trust God when I get what I want. I don't want to just trust God when He answers the prayers the way that I want them to be answered. But obviously they got what they wanted and they're partying. Okay? They walk 3 days into the desert. We're going to skip to the next chapter, Exodus 15. And they walked 3 days. Not 3 months, not 3 years, not 30 years. 3 years they walked into the desert, and they came to a place called Marah. Now Marah meant bitter. And so by 3 days, 2.5 million people plus animals are out of water in the middle of the desert. They come to this place called Marah, and it is an oasis. It is a big body of water, and when I say big body of water, I want you to understand that when you've got 2.5 million people plus animals, and that's a conservative estimate, it might have been 3 million people plus animals, that just the people alone, if they drink the average amount of water that an American drinks in the course of a day, you would need 5 Olympic-sized swimming pools a day. 660,000 gallons times 5. So they come to this big body of water, and the water is so bitter that no matter how thirsty they are, they can't drink it. And the people complained against Moses and said, "What are we going to do? What are we going to drink?" 3 days ago, God just parted the waters for you. And already, 3 days from now, you get to a body of water that's bitter, and you complain. Really? I got a friend of mine, I don't know why this came to my mind, except that it's funny. He's from Sao Paulo, Brazil. And if you're watching this on the internet, and I'm hoping that he will, he'll know exactly who I'm talking about. His name is Giovanni. And his English is actually very good, but he says some things kind of funny. So when he goes to say serious, it's Sidious. Are you serious? So, no, I'm not serious. I'm serious, but I'm not serious. So that's what comes to my mind. I'm thinking, it's been 3 days since you saw the largest miracle probably in the Bible. And you're going to complain again? Are you serious? That's nuts. So God points to a piece of wood and tells Moses, throw the wood in the water and the water will be sweet. Not just purified and drinkable, but sweet. There's no piece of wood in the world that can sweeten 3 million gallons worth of water. Okay, this is a huge miracle. So Moses takes the wood in front of everybody else and he throws it in the water, and the water becomes sweet, and they drink. And they fill up all their water skins. They don't have canteens. They've got skins of animals, and they put water in them to hold them for the next few days. And then they go as God tells them, and they make a few other stops. And then we're going to come to Exodus chapter 16. The whole Israelite community set out from Elim, which we've skipped some of these stories, and they go into the desert of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after they had come out of Egypt. 15th day of the second month. That means that they've been on the road, so to speak, 60 days, 2 months. Okay? Because we know it was the 14th of Nisan when they left. We know when this is. So they're in the desert. The whole community grumbles against Moses and Aaron because they're out of water again. Go to the next verse. The Israelites said to them the same thing that they say every time they get in trouble. Oh, if we had only died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. At least there we sat around pots of meat and we ate all the food that we wanted. It was, well, you were slaves, so no, you didn't really get to eat all the food that you wanted. And it really wasn't meat unless it was the animals of your own that you killed. Mostly you ate grass and leeks, which were the wild onions that you could gather after being a slave all day anyway. But now they're remembering it as, oh, at least we got to eat all that we wanted. We sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. Have you brought us in the desert to starve us, this entire assembly, to death? So let me get this right. You got 10 plagues that show God's power over 10 different Egyptian gods. You show that you're more powerful than any of their gods. And then after all of that, you release them from 400 years of slavery. You take them to the Red Sea, to the Yam Suf rather, in the Gulf of Aqaba. And then you open the water so that 2.5 million people plus their animals can pass through 200 feet deep water on dry land, so that you can go to an oasis 3 days later, and even though it's bitter, you can throw a piece of wood in it and make it sweet, so that a month and a half later you can come to another place in the desert where you're all out of water, and your knee-jerk reaction is, did you bring us into the desert to kill us? Were there not enough graves in Egypt? Did you bring us out here to starve us to death? Seriously? That's crazy talk. And I got to tell you, that I used to look at these guys. I mean, we've all read these stories, all of our life. And God's already, at this point in the story, God gives them the manna that comes every morning. And He sends quail that fly so low they can hit them with sticks and knock them out of the air. He's literally feeding them every day. How do you get to the point that you don't see God's hand at work in your life every day, so that you complain like this bunch of morons? And last week we even talked about the fact that He's leading them with a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. He's got a visual representation of Himself in front of them day and night. And I'm thinking to myself, I mean, I grew up with these stories. I know these stories. I almost discount the children of Israel as being so stupid that I don't even know if I want to read the stories anymore or not. Because what kind of a moron can see God's hand at work in their life every day, and then as soon as one thing happens, it's a major thing, you're out of water and you're in the desert. I get that. It's a life and death situation. It's not a minor thing. It's a major thing. How many major things does God have to deliver you from before you start saying, He delivered me last time, He delivered me the time before that, He delivered me the 12 times before that, so therefore He will deliver me this time? How stupid, do I have kids in here? Can I say stupid? How stupid can you be? And I was at a point in my life where I was struggling with some stuff. And I was mad at God. And you know what story He brought me back to? This one. How stupid can you be? Isn't that what you called the children of Israel, He said? Didn't you say they were stupid? He said, yeah, I did. I'm wondering how they can be so dense. He said, before you get too hard on them, you just need to know you're just like them. And I got defensive. I said, I am not just like them. They're idiots. I've never seen a pillar of cloud that you led me around. I never saw you as a pillar of fire. I've never walked through the Red Sea. I've never seen you bring water out of a rock, and I've never seen quail fly so low that I could hit them with a stick. So I'm not like them. And he said, and he began to show me stuff that he had shown me independently. And I thought about, everybody in here has cut themselves. And when you cut yourself, the blood begins to clot. And a lot of people think that the blood clots because it hits the air, and the air begins to dry it. But you need to understand that blood doesn't clot because it hits air. Blood carries oxygen. That's its job. Oxygen doesn't make it clot. What makes it clot are platelets and proteins that are, or enzymes that are in the proteins that identify a cut, know that it's not supposed to be there, and begin to coagulate only in that spot, so that the rest of the blood continues to flow through your body. It only coagulates at the part that's bleeding. And it only does it long enough for the skin, and your skin, my skin's old. Some of y'all's skin's not as old as my skin, but some of you, but even on you young whippersnappers, your skin's 30 years old. Okay? And it's not grown bunches of extra skin, but you cut your finger, the blood begins to coagulate, and that skin says, hey, there's an opening there. I'll close that up. And it grows new skin and closes it up. And when it does, the blood that had coagulated, the blood that had gotten hard inside, dissolves itself as if it's got its own brain. God says, you can see that and tell me that you don't know that you haven't seen God every day? Remember that time that you were racing motorcycles and you broke your collarbone? I said, which time? There was 3. He said, either one of them, it don't matter. I said, okay. Yeah, the bone shattered. And it was such a bad break that they said that they might have to do surgery and put a plate in there, but they really didn't want to do that. And so they showed me the x-rays, and the collarbone is in 5 assorted pieces that are now aiming in directions that God didn't intend for them to aim, but none of them's touching. And they said, do you want to plate it? Do you want to do surgery? Do you want to plate it? And I said, what happens if I don't plate it? And they said, oh, it'll grow back. I said, how's it going to grow back? The pieces ain't even touching in there. They said, oh, the body knows that it's supposed to be there. And it will. And I said, well, it's close enough to the end of the season. If I did surgery, I couldn't be back on the track in 6 or 8 weeks, so I might as well just let it heal in the off season. They said, okay. And it did. Fragments of bone, some of them that size of your little finger or whatever, some of them smaller than that, none of them touching, grew back together. And I said, well, is it going to make my shoulder pull in or anything like that when it grows? He said, no, it knows what the length needs to be, and once it heals, it'll lengthen or shorten until your shoulder is square with the other one. I said, are you kidding me? And God brings that back to my mind and says, you've never seen me before? Tore my knee out racing in West Virginia. I know we're establishing a habit or a pattern here, but I tore my ACL out, and so I go to the doctor and I say, "What can?" He said, "Yeah, your ACL's torn, and we're going to have to do surgery." I said, "Well, what are you going to do?" He said, "Well, we'll take a strip of tendon and off of your." Well, he said, "We can't." He said, "Your patella's torn too." He said, "But that'll grow back." He said, "That'll be fine." He said, "So we'll just use a cadaver." And I said, okay. I said, this is a ligament, right? And he said, yeah. Well, the ligament attaches to the bone like Spider-Man shot a web, and it attaches to it. It doesn't grow into the bone, it attaches to the bone. You can't cut that off and then just like super glue it to another bone, you know. So I'm asking him, because I'm, curious minds want to know. How you going to if you go into a cadaver and you cut the ligament off of the cadaver, then how you going to stick it in my knee? That don't make any sense. You can't just super glue it in there. And I said, and by the way, I don't want some 83-year-old man on a walker. I want some 20-year-old that got hit by a bus while he was jogging. Don't give me no old stuff. He said, that ain't the way it works. He said, what we're going to do is, he said, we're going to go into a tendon like attaches the patella. He said, we'll cut a strip out of it that's like twice as long as what we need. He said, we'll drill through the bone, and he said, and then we'll pull it all the way through the bone, and then the bone, you got this long ligament, and the bone then grows around the tendon. And I said, okay, so you drill a hole in the bone, both bones, you stick this tendon in there, and then the bone grows around it. I said, okay, but the ACL, I said, I'm no doctor, but an ACL is a ligament. That's what ACL stands for, anterior cruciate ligament. But you're going to take a tendon off of a dead guy and put it in my knee. And a ligament, I know ligaments help hold bones together, and they hold the muscles to the bones and things like that, but they don't have any stretch to them. I said, so then I guess what's going to happen is, and I'm just asking you, for the rest of my life then, that knee will just, I won't have any flexibility, as much flexibility and stuff like that. Is that right? And he goes, oh, no, you don't have to worry. He said, once the body realizes that the tendon is in there and the bone has grown around it, the body realizes that should be a ligament, and it will create blood vessels and blood flow through the ligament and turn it into a tendon. It'll create blood flow through the tendon and turn it into a ligament. And then it will shorten it or lengthen it as need be so that your knee has the same flexibility as it did prior to the accident. I said, you're telling me that you're going to go get a ligament off of a dead man, a young one, a healthy one. I'm just reminding you that. You're going to take that tendon, you're going to put it into my body, and my body's going to realize that that's supposed to be a ligament. And although it was in that other guy's body for 20 or 30 years as a tendon, when my body sees it, it's going to realize that in that position it should be a ligament. It's going to create blood flow, shorten or lengthen itself, and become a ligament. And he said, that's right. And I said, how can anybody in the medical field not be a Christian? Because you can't evolve to that. You can't rip and tear stuff and then through an evolutionary process your body figures out how to fix that. And God said, and you've never seen me before? My knee was kind of numb a little bit after the surgery. He said that it would be that way. He said it'll go away. He said your proprioceptive muscles have to regenerate. And I said, a holiday hoobie. What? He said proprioceptive muscles. He said we've cut in there and the body is shut down. And he said, and it has to reestablish proprioceptive input. I said, all right, what's that? Now, I thought about having you do this, but I'm not going to for the sake of time. You can do this on your own. Sometime I want you to stand up and put your feet about shoulder length apart, and you can stand there and you have perfect balance because your brain is using your eyes to triangulate everything around you, and if you lean one way or the other, you instantly see it and your toes will feel it. But close your eyes. If you close your eyes and you pay attention around your knees, you will start feeling those muscles tensing up and letting loose, because proprioceptive muscles are what's holding you straight up and down and balancing you. And when you cannot triangulate because you close your eyes, and if you're standing there touching something, you'll notice that your knees don't do anything. Because now your body's using the pressure from your hand to keep your body stable. You take your hand off and close your eyes, and you'll start feeling your knees doing this. And the muscles are sending messages to the brain. Lean a little left, lean a little right, lean a little front, lean a little back. Quit leaning so much. What are you doing? Because proprioceptive muscles are sending messages to the brain. That's how you can stand up straight with your eyes closed. Are you kidding? Are you serious? And God says, and you've never seen me before? And I had to apologize. I had to say, yeah, you're right. I am just like them. Because here I was at a point of crisis in my life, and I was mad, and I was upset, and I was scared, and I'll tell you a little bit more about it in a minute, but he says, you're just like them. And then he said this. He said, your problem and the problem of the people that you're teaching is generally not that you doubt my existence. You just doubt whether or not I'm going to come through for you. And no matter how many things you've seen me do, no matter how many times you've seen miracles in your life, no matter what you have seen, it's not a matter of you doubting my existence. You just doubt whether or not I'll come through for you this time. And the children of Israel had seen them. Go ahead and go to the next slide, David, I believe. The children of Israel had watched God deliver them from 400 years of slavery. They saw Him work the plagues and the miracles. They saw Him deliver them through the Yom Suf. They saw Him leading them with a pillar of cloud and a pillar of fire. They didn't doubt His existence. They didn't even doubt. They hadn't forgotten that He had delivered them last time. They just doubted if He was going to deliver them this time. He said there's a lot of people, both believers and unbelievers, who have no problem believing that I am God and that I'm all-powerful. They just have a problem believing that I'm going to deliver them this time. And that fear comes because they not understanding prayer, or they not understanding how I'm working behind the scenes, or they not really understanding free will and all the consequences that come with free will. They not understanding my timing. They have asked me for stuff that they didn't get enough times to where they've quit asking me. They've asked me to deliver them from something, and I didn't deliver them. So now they wonder if I'm ever going to deliver them again. They don't question whether I'm powerful or not. They question whether or not I will deliver them, because history has shown that I don't always give them what they want. And a lot of people have actually given up on praying. And when we do a study on prayer, in-depth study on prayer, we'll talk about this. People have so often prayed for stuff that they did not get that they quit praying because they go, you know what? God's going to do whatever He wants to anyhow. What does it matter what I pray? Just because He's delivered me 5 or 6 times in the past doesn't mean He's going to deliver me now. Because He delivered me 5 or 6 times, but there's 10 or 12 times I prayed and He didn't do anything. Hey, my wife's cancer came back last year. And we prayed that she wouldn't die, that God would heal her from the cancer. She died. That freaks people out. But you prayed. Yeah, we prayed. And the elders laid hands on her. Just like the Bible says we're supposed to do. And we asked God for healing. And she died. What do you do with that? What have you asked for in your life that you didn't get? What about that time that you got fired, or you got laid off, or you got something stolen, or somebody broke into your house, or you had somebody that was sick, or you were sick, or you got a pink slip, or whatever it was, and you prayed that God would deliver you, and He didn't? How does that temper, how does that form, how does that change the shape of your faith? And death, more than any other thing, the Bible says it is appointed unto man once to die. We talked about this in depth because we talked about the fact that death is the doorway to happily ever after. And that if we had any idea what was waiting for us on the other side of that doorway, that we would want to go through the doorway. We talked about that. Eye has not seen, ear has not heard, the mind cannot even conceive of the things that God has planned for us when we cross through that doorway. And yet on this earth we still shudder at the idea of death. And when God doesn't answer the way that we want Him to answer, it creates doubt. Satan will use that to create doubt and fear in us. And it paralyzes us. Because then every time we get into a situation like the children of Israel are getting into, every time we're in a life-threatening situation, or every time we're in a bad situation, or every time they're in a job situation, or a financial situation, or a marriage situation, and there have been times in our past that we prayed for stuff that God didn't answer, we're afraid He's not going to answer this time either. So what do we do with that? How do you get around that? At certain points as we go forward, I'm going to share with you some examples of some people in the Bible, like Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael, and Paul and Silas, and Gideon, and Daniel, and Job, and Mary, and Deborah, and a bunch of these people who were in terrible situations and were not afraid. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah said to the king, you guys probably know them by their Babylonian names, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. When they were getting ready to get thrown into a brick oven, an oven that ran in excess of 1,500 degrees and baked bricks, they said, our God is strong enough to deliver us from your fire. But if He doesn't, we're still not bowing down to you. How can they have that kind of boldness to tell the king, our God is powerful enough to deliver us from you and your furnace. But even if He doesn't, I will die before I will bow the knee to you. That's awesome. Where does that kind of courage come from? Paul and Silas are sitting in a prison, actually not in a prison, they're in a dungeon, in a nasty situation, chained to the floor or to the wall. No bathrooms. This ain't your Caldwell County jail system. This is a nasty, windowless, stinking dungeon. And the only reason they're in there is because they were doing exactly what God told them to do. Preach the gospel. And people didn't like them preaching the gospel. The Jews didn't like them preaching the gospel because it was messing up their whole religious thing. So they threw them in the dungeon. They're not in there because they did anything wrong. They're in there because they're doing exactly what God wanted them to do. And they're chained to the... Really? You're going to chain me to the floor? God, is this the best you've got? I spend my whole life working for you and preaching for you, and then you let me get stuck in a dungeon? That's not what they said. They're singing. In a miserable situation, they're singing. Why? How can they do that? How could Daniel look into the mouth of a cave full of hungry lions and step in? How can these... You know what we say? You know what our human nature says? Because they were like super godly patriarch people. They're like on a whole nother level. That's not us. And as long as we view them as that, we'll never aspire to that. As long as you see them being some kind of super saints, some super godly something or another, that you're not, then that's how they can do those great things. That's how they can be so brave. That's how they can be so magnificent and do great things for God. But you're off the hook because you're not super godly and you're not like a super patriarch. But the truth is, they were men and women just like us who had a courage, not a greatness. They had a strength that they found in the Lord, and that's what I want to show you tonight. And as long as we have an attitude towards God, as long as our attitude towards God or our relationship with Him or our trust in Him is based on what we can get out of Him, then we will never truly live in peace or victory. We'll never really understand the abundant life that He has planned for us. I want you to see that again. So long as you live your Christian life with an attitude towards God, so that your relationship with God, or how much you trust Him, is based on what you can get out of Him. In other words, whether He answers every prayer the way that you think He should answer every prayer. If that's the only reason you have a relationship with Him, then you'll never fully live in victory. You'll never understand what it's like to have the abundant life that Christ offered, because you're only in it for what you can get out of it. You're only loving Him for what He gives you. And you'll never know the abundant life. So how do we change this? I think we've wasted most of our time tonight painting the picture, and you guys know the picture, but I need you to see yourself in the picture, because I'm going to tell you what God used for me to change all this. And it was back when I had a large company, and I had over 24 employees, and I had made a whole lot of money at a relatively young age, and I was Small Business of the Year out of 400 companies in this county, and things were going great, and I had people looking that I had invented some products that made our company very worthwhile or worth some money. And so we had companies that were looking at buying us, and they wanted those inventions, and we were printing for people all over the United States. This little shop in Granite Falls, North Carolina, was printing stuff for people all over the United States. And I got a phone call. I mean, things were really going good. I don't want to brag. I just kind of need you to see the story, the truth of the story. And the truth of the story is things were going really well for me. And I tried to honor God in everything that I did. I gave Him glory. We gave part of our proceeds to missions. We supported missionaries. We did all this stuff. I never took credit for it. I knew that I was blessed by God. But then the phone rang. And it was one of my 4 largest customers telling me that they were going bankrupt. And that they're sorry, they couldn't pay their bills, that we would not ever see that money, blah, 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 the whole thing. Then the phone rang again. Then the phone rang again. Then the phone rang again. And in the course of 90 days, I had lost my 4 largest customers from 3 different states to bankruptcy. The people who were looking at buying us immediately stopped all dealings and all negotiations and said, we're going to take a wait-and-see position on this. They stuck me so bad that I went from being worth $1 million at the age of 36 to being worth negative $200,000 at the age of 47. It's called a reversal of fortunes. That's a really polite way of saying that you got sucked down a toilet with your money did. Threw me into a crisis of faith. That's the reason I love dealing with people who are in crisis of faith. I know how bad that'll affect you. I know how bad that'll get in your head. I know what it's like to lose more than a lot of people ever make. And I know when I look at the situation, I say, God, you could have stopped it here. You could have stopped it here. You could have stopped it there. You could have done this. You could have done that. You could have had me sell it before before the phone call started. You could have had done this. Blah, 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 blah. And I'm mad at God and I'm angry at God. And I know what that crisis of faith looks like. I know what it's like to get somewhere where nobody can hear you so that you can scream at the top of your lungs at God because you're so mad at Him. And I've spent I don't know what makes me madder, God. I've spent 36 years following you and doing everything that you've asked me to do. And now you do this to me? I don't know if I'm madder at losing the money or madder at wasting 36 years following you for nothing. Exercise my free will to talk to God because you know what? He knew my heart. He knew how angry I was. Lightning didn't strike me then, and it won't strike me tonight. Because God's a big boy, and He's heard it before. And some of you are in a crisis of faith, and some of you have said it before. If you've not said it, you've thought it before. And I'm in that funk. I'm in that bad place. But I was already, years prior to that, I was already in a habit of praying for a long period of time, every day. Well, I would say a long period of time, like an hour or so a day. And I was still maintaining that, but I was spending each of those hours every day fussing at God and arguing at God and blaming God and saying, woe is me, and why are you mad at me, and why do you hate me, and what have I done to deserve this, and did you bring me out in the desert to kill me? Why'd you let me come this far in business and then poke a hole in the boat and sink me in the middle of the ocean? Blah, blah, blah. Just like them. Just like the children of Israel. And this is what He said to me one day. Rocked my world. This is one of those days He spoke. I don't know if He spoke audibly or not. I checked the room to see if there's anybody in the room, because I think I heard it out loud, but maybe I just heard it in here. And He wasn't happy. It wasn't a real friendly voice. He said, what is it you want me to do? I said, what? Because the first time you hear, that's not the first time I've heard God's voice, but when you hear God's voice, it kind of freaks you out just a little bit. So I said, huh? He said, what is it you want me to do? And my mind started spinning. Because I realized I had badgered Him long enough. I was getting ready to get whatever I asked for. He was tired of hearing me come to Him every day and badger Him and complain to Him and gripe to Him. I was getting ready to get whatever it is that I asked for. I am convinced of that. First thing that came to my mind was King Solomon. Because God came to King Solomon and said, because I loved your daddy so much, I'm going to give you anything that you ask for. And King Solomon, who became the wisest man on earth other than Jesus, said, I'm a teenager and I'm supposed to lead your people. I need, more than anything else, wisdom. And God said, seriously? Because God has a Brazilian accent. I don't know if you guys knew that or not. I've heard Him, but anyway. He said, you could have asked for money, you could have asked for power, you could have asked for wealth, and you asked me for wisdom? He said, I'll give you wisdom. I'll give you more wisdom than I've ever granted any other man in the history of the world. I'll give you that much wisdom. And I'll tell you what else I'm going to do. I'll give you the wealth and the power and the fame and the fortune that you didn't even ask for. Because I am so proud of your answer. So here I am, thinking, you better answer carefully. And I'm not you're trying to manipulate God. Do I ask for something really godly and hope that He gives me the other two? Do I really want the $1 million back? Is that what I want? Or should I ask for $2 million? While I'm asking, what's fair to ask for? Is it the money that I want, or is it my reputation that I want? But wait a minute. What if God? Well, hang on a second. No, because what if God did this for a reason? What if I lost the company because He knew that if I got the $1 million, I would buy, who knows, a boat or a car or a motorcycle or something, and my kids would get killed on it? Oh shoot! What if He's saving my kids? Wait a minute. What if it was the $1 million? What if I took the money and it ruined my relationship with my kids, and then for the rest of my life I've got a damaged relationship? I don't want $1 million that bad. Hang on. What if that's not it? What do I ask for? What? He says, what do you want me to do? This is not like a genie in a bottle with 3 wishes. I get one. And I am convinced to this day, whatever I asked for that day, I would have gotten. And I'm sitting there sweating. Because I don't know what the future holds. I don't know what I want. I would love to have the money back, but not at the expense of my kids. I would love to have my reputation back in the business world, but not at the expense of something else. I would love to. I don't know. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know what I want. How can I possibly know what I want? Because I don't know what the future holds, and I don't know what the ramifications are. I don't know what the ramifications are. If I get this, what's going to happen? When I get this, what other dominoes are going to fall? If this happens, if I ask for this, then what else is that going to come? I don't know. I'm shaking thinking about it. I was shaking that day. I'm shaking thinking about it. And then it dawned on me. Is there anything that you want more than you want the will of God in your life? I'm asking me. No. I want to be in God's will. Because one of these days, no matter how much I've screwed up this life, when I cross through that doorway of death and I get to start my happily ever after, I want Him to say to me, well done. You are a good and faithful servant. One of these days when I die, I want it to be to where I have not done anything on this side of the door that's going to stop me from getting treasures on that side of the door. If God was to say, do you want $1 million now, or do you want treasures in heaven for all of eternity? I'd be a fool to take $1 million now. Right? So maybe it's not about the money at all. Maybe it's about building up treasures in heaven. What is it I want? Is there anything on this world that I want so bad that I'm willing to tick God off? No. Some of you are sitting there tonight and you're thinking, if God ever asked me that, I'd tell Him I want this and this and this. But if God ever asked you and you knew that He was going to give you whatever you asked for, you'd be shaken too. And you know what? The only answer I could come up with? I don't know how long it took me because time stood still for a while for me. 1,000 thoughts went through my mind. And I came up with this. God, I don't know the future. And I don't think I'm smart enough to even know what I want. So what I want more than anything else is for you to be pleased with me. I want to live a life that is pleasing to you, so that when I cross through that doorway of death and start my happily ever after, you can say to me, I'm proud of you, boy. You did good. So that's what I'm going to ask for. Now, there's a part of me that's thinking He's going to do to me like He did to Solomon, and He's going to be really happy with me. That's not what He said. He said, then you can't complain every day. That really wasn't the warm fuzzy I was looking for, but He's right. In other words, I've given you a chance. I've offered you whatever you wanted, and you tell me that what you want more than anything is to be in the middle of my will. Then you can't complain every day about what you don't have. You're right. He's exactly right. That changed everything for me that day. Romans chapter 8, verse 5 never made sense to me prior to this. Well, it did, but not as much as it did after this. Those who live according to the flesh being the things that I want, the habits that I want, the addictions that I want to fulfill, the lust that I want to fulfill, the money that I want to make, the power that I want to hold, the popularity that I think I want. Those who live according to the flesh have their mind set on the flesh desires. But those who live according to the Spirit, capital S, that means not our spirit, that means Holy Spirit. Those who live in accordance with the Holy Spirit have their minds set on the Spirit desires. Romans 8, chapter 10, a few verses later, says, "But if Christ is in you, then even though your body is subject to death because of sin, the Spirit, or the Holy Spirit, capital S, gives you life because of righteousness." In other words, if you're going to live for the flesh, and all of your life is going to be spent trying to get what you want and trying to get God to, trying to twist God's arm. And if you pray it just right and you say it just right and you anoint Him with the elders and you use some oil or you pray magic words or whatever it is, then you twist God's arm and He has to do what you say. Then you'll be disappointed every time that you don't say it just right and you don't get what you want. But if you're not living for the flesh, you're not living for what you want, you realize that God loves you more than you love yourself. He knows what the future holds. He's got long-term thinking, not short-term thinking. And He loves you so much that He says that not a bird falls to the ground that I don't know about it, and you are way more important than a bird. He says He keeps track of how many hairs are on your head. He says He engraves, not writes with a Sharpie, He engraves your name in the palm of His hand. He wants what's best for you long term. And if you're going to live for that, then you can't live after the flesh. You can only have one or the other. Choose whichever one you want. You've got free will. And if you're living for the Spirit, then death no longer has you in its grip because you're no longer afraid of death. If you are the Shadrach, the Meshach, and the Abednego, if you are the Hananiah, Azariah, or Mishael of your day, then you can look at the face of the King and say, my God can deliver me from your fiery furnace, but even if He doesn't, I will not bow down to your idol. Because if I honor God in this life, then I have honored God in this life, and if He allows me to die, I will get glory for it in heaven. I can't lose. I can be chained to the prison floor and sing praises to God, because if I rot to death in here, I have honored God. If He delivers me, I've honored God. If I die in here, I get my reward for it in heaven. I can't lose. The only time I can lose is when I'm in this for me. The only time I can lose is when I'm worried about feeding the flesh and getting what I want. I'm more worried about my money than I am the will of God. I'm more worried about my life than I am the will of God. I'm more worried about starving to death or dehydrating to death in the desert than I am the will of God. The only time I can lose is when I'm concentrating on what I want and trying to use God as some kind of a genie to give me what I want. I get away from that and I want to honor God, then not even death itself can stop me. That's powerful. Romans 8:18, another few verses, even goes on to say this. I consider that now this is the guy that's in prison. This is the guy that is chained to the floor. This is the guy who's been under house arrest. This is the guy that's been shipwrecked 3 times. This is the guy that's been bit by the poisonous snake. This is the guy, Paul, who spent his entire life wasted in prison. I consider that our present sufferings are not even worth comparing to the glory that will be revealed in us. He's saying, take it from a guy who's had a rough time. Take it from a guy who's been chained up most of his adult life. Take it from a guy who's extremely well educated, but I'm in house arrest all the time. Take it from a guy that's been shipwrecked and beaten and almost to death on more than one occasion and snake bit. Take it from me. Our present sufferings in this life don't even compare to what's waiting on the other side of the doorway of death in the happily ever after. In other words, you can't do anything to me on this side of the door if I'm living for Christ. Because he was also the one that wrote the first two verses that we talked about. If I'm living for Christ, I'm living for the Spirit and not for my flesh. There's nothing that you can do to me on this side of the doorway that's not going to make the other side of the doorway even sweeter. Death loses its grip over us. We don't live in fear and anxiety about whether or not God's going to deliver us from the desert or deliver us from the Yom Soph. We don't worry about whether God's going to deliver us from it. We're just worried about staying in God's will. Paul had a good old case of short-timer's disease. I don't know if you guys know what short-timer's disease is. It's what my daddy used to say. He said, boy, don't let short-timer's disease get you. Because I had a job somewhere, and somebody else had come along and they'd offer me a better job with better pay or better hours or better something else. But he said, you've got to be honorable and you've got to work your 2 weeks' notice. So I would hand in my notice. Now I got to work at this crappy job for 2 more weeks, knowing that that job's waiting on me. He said, don't you let short-timer's disease eat you up. Because short-timer's disease is I know I'm only going to be here for a couple weeks. So it's really easy for me not to give my best. It's really easy for me not to give this job 100% because I'm waiting on that job. It's really easy for me not to pay the owners respect because I'm really can't wait to work for those owners. It's short-timer's disease. It's really hard to do a really good job during that 2 weeks notice that you're working because your eyes, your sights, your anticipation, everything's waiting on that new, better, higher paying job. That's short-timer's disease. That's what Paul had. That's what I got. Because I'm in this world, waiting on that world. I'm living in this life, can't wait to get to that life. Got trouble here, and some bad situations here, and I know that there are no bad situations on the other side of that doorway. And yet I got to live over here because I'm working my notice. I don't dread the doorway. I'm looking forward to the doorway. But while I'm here, I got work to do. And I'm not going to let Satan rob the work that I can do here by giving me short-timer's disease. Because while I'm here, I'm going to give it 100%. 100% while I'm here. I'll get my reward soon enough. So I'm convinced as we look at this thing with children of Israel and that kind of thing that the problem is not praying and getting the answer that you want. The problem is you're asking the wrong questions. She knows my time is up. My time was up 5 minutes ago and she's just reminding me. Shiloh, honey, I'm taking about a paragraph off of this, I promise. I'm about done. The problem is not so much of you're not getting what you want from God. The problem is you're not asking God the right question. In the midst of your crisis of faith, in the midst of your turmoil, instead of continuing to ask God to bail you out or to deliver you, be asking God, how do I glorify you in this situation? How do I bring you glory? How do I live on this side of the door that builds up treasures in heaven? What can I do for you here, God? How can I please you? How can I glorify you? How can I honor you here while I'm here? And then all of a sudden, who I marry, it's a big deal. Where I go to school, what job I take, where I live, all becomes more important. Because every decision that I make is now in light of what am I here for and what am I trying to accomplish, and how will it help me or hinder me from accomplishing the goals that God has for me here. All of a sudden, whether I live in obedience or not, whether or not I sin, and whether or not I sleep around, or whether or not I feed my addictions or lust or whatever it is, all of a sudden, all of those things begin to affect my goal in life. And my goal in life is to please God in this side, the doorway, so I can build up treasures on the other side of the doorway. So all of a sudden, sin is not just something that I have to avoid so I don't make God mad. Sin is something that I don't want to have any part of, because it messes up what I'm trying to accomplish in my lifetime. My prayer life totally changed. From God, give me this, God, give me that, God, fix this, God, deliver me from that, God, heal this, God, heal that. To God, this is where I am today. This is what's happening to me. How do I use that to honor you? God, this is the situation I'm in. This is the questions that are before me, and I need an answer from you so that I know how to answer these questions. Hey God, this is the hardship that I'm in, and I don't know what to do about the hardship, so I'm asking you, what do you want me to accomplish? What do I do here, now? I'm not worried about, hey listen, if I'm in a bad job, I'm not worried about trying to get out of the bad job. I'm not going to waste my time every day begging God to get me out of that bad job. I'm going to say, God, you don't waste my time, because I've only got a limited amount of time between cradle and grave anyhow. You're not going to waste my time. I might waste it, but God ain't going to waste it. So if I'm in a terribly crappy job, then instead of wasting my prayer time going, God, please get me out of this incredibly crappy job, God, why do you have me here? You know that I don't like this job. So is there somebody here that I'm supposed to reach? Is there somebody here that I'm supposed to be an influence on? Is there something here I'm supposed to teach somebody? Is there something about this job that I need to learn? Is there something about the situation that you've got me in that teaches me something so that when you do get me out of this job, it makes the next job better? What is it, God, that you want me to learn? Totally changes your prayer life. What is it you want me to learn? What is it you want me to accomplish? This changes everything. I will no longer live in a state of fear and anxiety, wondering whether God's going to bail me out. I will live in victory and peace, knowing that my God is in charge. And I will spend my time trying to find out how I can please Him, not how I can manipulate Him. Amen? Let's pray.